Hi everyone. Today we are going to talk about final keyword in Java. Again, this is a part of object-oriented programming series. So, what is final keyword and why do we need this final in Java? So, final keyword is Java's way of actually having something called as immutability. Now, what is immutability? Mutable means something which changes, right? I think in pandemic time, everybody has heard the word of mutations, right? Virus was going through mutations and all. So yes, the word mutation means to change. Immutable means to not change, something which does not change. So final is a way through which we can achieve immutability for our data which is stored in our programs. All right. Now, why do I need something where when once I store some data in my variable, I do not want to change it? Why? When would you need a scenario like this? See, object-oriented programming is nothing but you are basically trying to solve real-world problems. To solve that, you are using some concepts which help us to simulate your real world in a program, in a software, and then we are able to, build up solutions on it. Correct? Now, in the real world, let's take an example of the college. Okay, any college school where you will have something called as students. You will have students, you will have professors, and so on. Right? Now, in that scenario, think about it, you can have some data which does not change. Might be the total number of courses of, which have been offered by a college might not change. Might be the business model is that they've decided it's going to be around 10 courses which they're going to offer, which will not change, right? So whenever you have data which when you're trying to, so if suppose if I have to replicate this or create this student database or a student, not database but student what to say, student entity into my class, and I want to store this information of total number of courses which this particular college is going to going to actually provide is not going to change over time, then how do I do this? I want to have a way through which I should not allow my programmers, right, to be able to change the data. That means now when you write simple int, suppose if you say some variable, say total number of courses, okay, total courses. If I say this, suppose is 10, right? Now, whoever has access to this class, right? Because they can access the data by creating objects and might be, be able to change the data, right? Now, some of you might say, how about I make this private? If I make this particular data private, then you would say that then nobody will be able to, change the data. But is it the case? No. When you make a data member private, at least the members which belong to the same class do have access to the data member, and they can actually change the value of this variable total courses, right? I have a scenario where once I initialize that variable with some data, I do not want that data to be changed ever. It should basically act like a constant. Like for example, a most practical example would be you are writing some software for some mathematical application. All right. In these mathematical applications, in maths, we have a lot of constants. Like the famous one is pi, right? We have a pi constant, right? So the value of pi is never going to change, right? No matter what, the value of pi is not going to change. So such mathematical constants, right? I could save the data. I mean, I can take a variable, might be depending upon how you, I mean, suppose if I want two decimal places, the value of pi up to two decimal places, I could simply create a double, right? Say this is pi and say this is 3.14. Okay, now I do not want anyone who is accessing the program to be able to change this value because it is not required, it is constant, right? So that I can to achieve two things, right? By doing this, by making this variable constant, one thing is I do not now now my programmers, whoever are going to write program for this mathematical application, need not remember any kind of constants, right? They can simply call this variable and they will have access to the data. Second thing, you can also allow, avoid any kind of mistakes which can programmer can do, right? Might be somebody, if you do not make this, if you do not make this immutable, then might be some programmer comes along and by mistake changes this value to something 2 or something like, just 3, something like that, which might, because of the small mistake or small manipulation in data, it's possible that all your calculations, all the other programs which are going to run are going to fail because the data used is incorrect. Right? So to avoid such scenarios, what we can do is we can introduce the concept of immutability. Immutability means once you have, this is where you declare your a variable. A variable pi has been declared, which is of data type double. This is where you're initializing the value. Initializing of a variable means where you assign the value, or you assign some data to the variable for the first time, right? So when you make this final, once you make a variable final, you have to initialize. That means you have to give the value to the variable during the time of declaration only. So when you have to make any variable private, final, you have to do what? You have to assign the data at the time of declaration only. If you suppose say final and you say double and pi, and you say that okay, might be later on I would go ahead and say pi equal to 3.14. This will give you an error. The reason is because when you say final, it means that you know the value of pi and you want to assign it only at the time of declaration only. So declaration initialization is going to happen at the same time when you have to do final. Okay, that's one way. Another way is you can also initialize this variable, might be through constructors. So there are two ways how you can initialize a final variable. One is during the time of declaration only, you initialize the value, which is shown here. And second way is through constructors. So suppose if a program or a class has through 3 to 4 constructors, right? We can have a default constructor and you can have parameterized constructor. If you want to initialize your final variable through constructors, you have to make sure that all the constructors have the value of you have initialized the value of the final variable. Let's have a look. Now suppose I have a class student. Okay, let me create a final variable here. So I've written the name. Let's write here final. Okay, and this is int. This is my final. Now one thing I can do is simply write 10 here and I will be able to use this value across. Okay, whenever I create copies of my have different objects for this particular class student, all of them are going to be able to access this because this is a non-static member. Correct? But what if I do not want to do it here, but rather when the object is created, that's when I want to assign the value to this final. Yes, it will be assigned only one time when the object is created, and that's why I'm putting it into constructor. So I can do so. So here if you see, I have 1, 2 and 3 constructors. So if you have to initialize a final variable through constructors, you can do so, but you will have to put the value in every constructors. Why? Because whenever you create an object, you are going to call one particular type of constructors, and when an object gets initiated, it's going to have a copy of all its data members, right, of the class. So if it is a final, means there should be a value assigned to this final variable. So that's why it's important that you initialize this final variable in every constructors, right? So this is also an interview question where you'll be asked, like in Java, if you are creating a final variable, how are the different ways of initializing the final variable? One is through constructors, and the second one is when you're actually initializing it, you can simply put a value there. Okay, hope this helps.